Hello and welcome to the Mind Tools Expert Voices podcast. I'm Rachel Salaman and I've presented the expert interviews in the Mind Tools Club for the last 16 years. So I've talked to hundreds of experts on a wide range of workplace topics.
And I'm Jonathan Hancock, a writer and editor at Mind Tools. Millions of people use our free site every year, which runs alongside our library of premium resources like Rachel's interviews. We help people to strengthen every aspect of their performance at work and their success and well-being in general. And I've been helping to put together our expert conversations for not 16, but for the last 4 years. And I've also got used to dipping into this huge archive of interviews that we've built up. But what are we going to do with this brand new podcast, Rachel?
Well, we decided that we're going to tackle a different work-related issue each episode and see what we can learn from the expert voices that we've collected over the years. So what we decided, Jonathan, didn't we, was that you and I will each take a slightly different angle on the topic that we're looking at. We would both go back into the archives and pick some clips to share and see how they sound today.
And I think it's going to be so interesting to hear what themes come up between the two of us. Maybe views will have changed over the years. Maybe things will sound different in the light of current events. And I wonder where the experts will agree and disagree when we bring them all together like this. And we want to hear listeners' views too. I think that's a really exciting part of this. So get ready to share your reactions and personal experiences. And Rachel, I'm dying to ask you a few behind-the-scenes questions as well from when you met these eminent people the first time around. So let's get started then. What's our first topic?
Right, so episode 1 is about, can I ask for more pay? When is the right time to discuss a raise or a promotion? How do you go about it? And what do both people in the conversation need to consider?
Yes, I think things might look quite different for employers and employees. And we're obviously living through some really turbulent and financially challenging times at the moment. But I do think it sounds a very timeless question, this
Yes, who hasn't wondered that question? And it's one that's come up in quite a few of the conversations over the years in our expert interview podcasts. So I've been exploring this from the point of view of organisations, leaders and managers. But let's start with what you found, Jonathan, because you went into the archives with employees in mind.
I did. And I thought this was such an interesting question with lots of different bits to it. Do I need more money? Am I worth a raise or a promotion? But also, what's the right time to ask? And then how do you go about it? It can be a really daunting question for people. But you know me, Rachel, I'm a positive guy. I wanted to start off with a positive approach to this, and I found Annie McKee was very good at this. She was a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania when you spoke to her. She'd also experienced periods of poverty when she was supporting her young family, but was really clear about the importance of being positive. She said that's how you start the journey to getting the rewards that you deserve.
There's a difference between a focus on positivity and fantasy. You know, life has its ups and downs, work has its ups and downs. We have to deal with challenges, obstacles, pressures, all sorts of things. But in order to deal with those challenges and obstacles, we need resilience, we need optimism, we need hope. And when we feel that way, we're better able to take on challenges, to deal with setbacks. So my answer to people who say, well, a relentless focus on positivity is going to cause us to overlook the real challenges, I don't think we're in any danger of overlooking any real challenges in the workplace. In fact, they usually drag us down. Instead, we need to take charge and really make an effort to be more optimistic, more positive.
Annie McKee, who knows from experience how hard it can be when you're not getting enough money. And she says that making things better begins with a positive mindset. Are you with her on that, Rachel, as the right starting point?
Absolutely, but particularly her version of it, which I thought was reassuringly solid, wasn't it? What you might call a full-fat positive mindset with resilience and taking charge and being realistic. So it's really different from that kind of airy-fairy Pollyannaism that sometimes gets people into trouble, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm always on the lookout for a patronising tone, and I didn't get that from her at all. She's not saying forget about the daily challenges. She's saying, fair enough, you might be struggling, but look to the future. That will give you some hope that might then give you ideas for how to deal with the problems, and it'll give you something to aim for. So, yes, I think like you, I did sense a real practical positivity there from her. And Dory Clark also makes a similar point. She's one of the top 50 business thinkers in the world. And she says we need to think about our challenges now and be realistic, but also look beyond them. And she calls that the long game career future.
For most of us, we do have ambitions about where we want to go and what we want our lives and our careers to look like. And it is really hard to get there if we are constantly in reactive mode, just responding to what's in front of us.
And I really love the way she explained that long-term thinking can actually make you more proactive about your career now. And again, it's that theme of looking to the future, but do something now to try and make a difference. So you can be moving towards things like raises and promotions.
We have to get a little bit more proactive about setting the vision so that we can begin to take the steps that move us in that direction. That's not to say there won't be interruptions or detours along the way, but we need to know where we're going so we can actually strive to be directionally correct in getting there.
How is she to speak to? She pops up on my social media all the time, and she's obviously very influential at the moment. What would she like to talk to?
She was very, very professional and very insightful. Clearly someone who plans, as you would expect with that topic of that particular book. Yeah, no, it was a fascinating interview.
And what she said there reminded me of something that Robert Kaplan said that actually made me laugh when I first heard it. He's from Harvard Business School, and you talked to him about his book, What You're Really Meant to Do. He said this about why you need to say something.
Because shockingly, your boss is not psychic. And I think a lot of us think that if I work at a company and I've been there for many years and they know me, they know what I'm interested in, and if a big promotion or big opportunity comes, they're going to think of me. Well, the reality is they're thinking about lots of people, especially if it's a big company. They're thinking about a whole lot of people, and they're actually expecting you to speak up a bit and tell them what you love and what you're interested in, and you're making their job easier. Now, in order to do that, you have to actually know what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are your passions, and is there a job in this place that actually, boy, I'd love to do that someday. Because the reality is you might be able to do it if you speak up. Now, also, a lot of people don't speak up because they don't want to offend their current boss. You have to use your judgment. But I've seen this over and over again where somebody gets picked for a job and people are devastated that they weren't asked. And as they think it through, they realize they weren't asked because they never talked to the boss because they thought that wasn't their job to do that. And I think it is.
And I think we're all guilty of that at times, aren't we? In all sorts of situations, just assuming that other people are mind readers.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a common thing. We're all starring in the movies of our own lives, aren't we? And we sometimes forget that we may not even be a bit part in the movies of other people's lives, which actually can be a comforting thought in a way. But it does mean that in certain situations, we do need to spell things out more than we might naturally do, especially when we need people to be aware of our value or our worth in a situation like asking for a raise.
And I've seen that play out in the workplace, but I've seen it in two different ways. I've seen a boss who assumed that somebody was happy when they were actually really unhappy and they were actively looking for work. So the boss missed the opportunity to do things to help that person stay. But I've also seen a boss who assumed that somebody was unhappy and wanting to leave, but actually that person was just looking for more opportunities and maybe a bit more credit at work, and they could have stayed. So from both sides, I guess the point is there, don't assume telepathy. Make sure you have the conversation, find out what's going on. But how do you get the bravery to do that? It can be really nerve-wracking. And Melanie Katzman has some good advice about getting up that courage. She's a psychologist and business consultant, and she told you some really good advice from her book, Connect First.
First of all, I don't think that we need to adopt an apologetic attitude. Too often people go in saying, I'm so sorry, but I need to ask for this. It's like, no, if you are asking for what you're worth, be direct about it. If the compensation on a monetary basis isn't what you wanted, or even if it is, there's still an opportunity to ask for inclusion in certain distribution lists, a seat at certain tables, an opportunity to perhaps have meetings with the press, a chance to have introductions to people both within and outside of the company. I ask people to write down what they want ahead of time. So when you go in, you're not suddenly flustered. You know what the number is.
Melanie Katzman with good advice, I thought, for anyone who's nervous about self-promotion because it just feels too much like showing off.
Oh, that really resonated with me. And I think culture really comes into play here, Jonathan, doesn't it? I mean, especially for us Brits, talking about our achievements can feel really, really uncomfortable.
We're being very brave talking about money at all, I think, today, being British.
Yes, absolutely. But we really do need to find a way. And I think that Melanie had some really great advice there, especially that thing about jotting down things before you go in. I mean, it's just that little safety net to help you through and find the words.
And let me also bring in Californian entrepreneur Bonnie Marcus. She says that when you're getting prepared for these sort of conversations, focus on your value to the business.
Self-promotion is really challenging because of all the baggage that we have. There has to be a way where we can talk about our accomplishments and not turn people off, and at the same time feel really comfortable doing it. And that's by identifying and using your value proposition, how your work leads to successful business outcomes. And once you identify that, then you're in the position where you can offer to help others reach their objectives based on your work. And that creates credibility and visibility for you, what you need to really get ahead in the workplace.
So I thought some good advice from Bonnie Marcus there about getting that confidence and focusing on your value when you go into these meetings. And Alexandra Carter, now there's another interesting person. You've got to speak to some brilliant people over the years, haven't you? A negotiation trainer with the United Nations, professional mediator at Columbia Law School. And Alexandra explained how this focus on value that we're talking about now is at the heart of any negotiation you might have about your pay.
I teach that negotiation is steering relationships. What that means is it's not just the money conversation. It means that you are teaching somebody how to value you, how to think about your business, or how to think about you personally. And it means that you're continuing to steer that relationship long after the contract or the deal.
I really like that phrase, steering relationships.
Yes, and that was something particularly unusual about that interview and about Alexandra's definitions, because she used the word negotiate like a canoeist negotiating the rocks in a river. So that's where the idea of steering comes through. It's a slightly different, well, it's like a double meaning, really, isn't it? It's the usual meaning of negotiation. But then if you think of that other one, a canoeist on a river, you can see that there is a steering element to it.
And it's not just that one-shot conversation with your boss. It is a more complex, longer-term process. There might be some rocks in the river along the way. But she also said you have to know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. So be specific. Is it that you're feeling undervalued or held back from promotion or losing motivation? What is it that you're trying to negotiate around?
You're looking to do, let's say, a home renovation. You know, you're trying to renovate your bathroom in your home. And you sit down with your contractor to start talking about the project. People say to me, well, shouldn't I just start, talking numbers? No. What's the problem you're trying to solve? If you're trying to renovate your bathroom so that you can sell your home, maybe then your strategy is going to be to design a bathroom that's roughly comparable to the homes in the neighborhood that have sold well. If you're renovating because you're going to live in that home for 30 years, well, you have a whole other set of priorities and choices. And I find that it's the same thing whether you're going in to ask about, a salary or a promotion, whether you are approaching potential clients. The place you want to start is thinking about what problem you want to solve.
And so you're a negotiator in these situations. And actually, several of your guests talked about negotiation strategies that could be helpful in pay conversations, didn't they?
Yes, I've talked to quite a few professional negotiators, actually, for the Expert Interviews collection of podcasts. Alexandra is a negotiator at the UN, but we also talked to Corey Kupfer, who's a lawyer and a business negotiator, and a couple of FBI hostage negotiators.
Yes.
Chris Voss and Mark Goulston, who brings the psychological expertise as well, because he's a professional psychiatrist.
And Mind Tools has a range of articles and videos and infographics to back all of that up as well. We look at all the different aspects of negotiating, so I think they're definitely worth looking into when it comes to these discussions about pay and promotion. For example, we've got some really good stuff on controlling your emotions when you're going into difficult conversations. And you mentioned Corey Kupfer there. He was really strong on this. You talked to him about his book, Authentic Negotiating.
most negotiations go off the rails, or people don't get what they want, not because they don't know some tactic or counter tactic. It's because they get upset. Their emotions get engaged, or they're not clear on what they want, and then they don't get there. It's all of this work that we need the harder work, the internal work, not the surface level tactics that cause negotiations to go bad. People ego gets engaged, or their fear comes up, or any of these things happen. So this is real practical advice. It may sound soft, but this is really the key to true negotiating success.
Does that ring true with you, Rachel? The idea of the theory of negotiation versus the real world, real time emotions that people go through?
Oh, it's such a difficult thing to do, isn't it? I mean, I think I'd be surprised if anyone really can enter into this kind of negotiation without feeling a little fearful and a little emotional.
Yes. It's good to know that other people have those emotions as well, isn't it?
Yes,
even if they're
absolutely
covering them up, or they've found clever ways to control them, like our negotiators have talked about. Yeah, most people, if not everybody, probably feels nervous going into these kind of conversations. And there were actually a few hard truths in some of your interviews, I thought. This is something that came up in your chat with Cal Newport from Georgetown University.
People don't like to give up their money unless they're really getting value for it in exchange. If people are offering you book contracts or job offers in a particular field, then you're valuable enough to make a go in that field, for example. And if they're not, you probably don't have enough skill or value there yet.
Fair enough, do you think? As things stand, you just might not be worth anything more.
Yes, I mean, hearing Cal say that, it just makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's really hard to justify asking for more if you're not actually bringing any more value to the company or the organisation. So you really need to think that through, I guess, before one of these conversations. Are you asking for more money because you just want more money, or because you're worth more and need your pay adjusted accordingly?
Yes. And of course, the key way to boost your value is to keep learning. And Kurt Mortensen from the Persuasion Institute said, you can't get lazy about your self-development if you expect to increase your pay.
And there's a one-to-one relationship between your personal development and your income. Because there's two ways to learn in life. You can learn by trial and error, or you can learn from somebody else. Everything you need to master to be more successful, someone else has already figured it out, and they can teach you in a CD or a book or a seminar. You can find mentors out there. And even the bigger thing we notice is that a Harvard study shows that those who are learning and growing every day, they're more optimistic about life. They're more enthusiastic about where they're going, what they're going to accomplish. But those who aren't learning and growing every day become negative, pessimistic, doubtful about themselves and the future. So A, it's a great motivator. B, contrary to popular belief, what you don't know will hurt you. There's a skill that we need to learn and master. You find an expert, get the book, the CD, the seminar, mentor with them, whatever you need, and you're going to learn it 100 times faster and save yourself a lot of money and make a lot more money.
I'd love it if it was really that easy. You could just buy a book, read it, and then suddenly you'd be this expert. But it's good to be hopeful. I mean, and some people who put in the work will get very far that way. But I have a feeling it's not quite as easy as he was saying.
Yeah, if it was all in one book, wouldn't that be wonderful? Emma Seppler from Stanford, I thought, had a really positive take on that self-development side of things in terms of improving your career and your standing at work and your rewards. She warned against getting bogged down in things you can't do, but spotting opportunities to learn new things that you'll then get rewarded for. So it's quite similar to what Kurt was saying, but maybe a kind of more rounded take on self-development.
I would say don't let a belief in your strengths hold you back. So if you want to apply for a promotion, but it involves a lot of public speaking, and that's something you don't feel comfortable with, don't let that hold you back. Public speaking is something you can learn. It's a skill you can do well at. Let's say every other part of the job is your dream job, but it involves this public speaking. So still apply, because you can learn it and you can expand your skills and you can become a good public speaker. The problem is when people hold themselves back in that situation. The other problem is when people make a mistake or fail at something and then they beat themselves up about it and they think, there's no way I can do a good job at this, I'm made for this, etc. And again, you're creating a situation where you're not allowing yourself to learn, to build new skills, or acquire new knowledge.
That was Emma Seppler. She sounded like a really interesting, positive person to talk to.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was a great interview. She's one of the leading lights, I think it's fair to say, of the positive psychology movement. And she has a lot of useful practical tips as well as, more general points.
But then I suppose however much you learn, however much you steer the relationships and negotiate like a pro, it just might not work. And Dory Clark, I thought she had a really refreshing take on what you might have to decide to do in that case.
You know, if you are not thriving at a particular company, that doesn't mean you're not good. It just means if you are legitimately a high caliber person, it is possible that you have found yourself in an inopportune circumstance where people do not appreciate your talents.
I love that. It just seemed to follow on well from what those other experts told you. Have a positive mindset, get help, talk to the boss, be clear about your value, keep working on yourself and learning and buying the books and CDs. But if it's not paying off, don't just keep flogging that dead horse. You might have to move on to get what you deserve. But I guess for many people, what she was saying there would mean weighing up the benefits of their current role before saying goodbye to it. The challenge that the job gives them, the satisfaction, great people to work with, decent work-life balance, all those good things. Lots of your guests talked about how much those things are worth. It's not just about the paycheck, is it?
Yes, and from the employer's point of view, it's something they'll be thinking about too. And I think we'll hear a few interesting comments from that point of view in a bit.
One final clip from me, and it's Happiness at Work expert Annie McKee again. She says, keep your eyes on the future, have a career plan, but also do those things now that can make your current job enjoyable and meaningful. She says that will get you through the short-term issues, but you'll keep growing your career and you will get all those different types of reward that you might be looking for.
I really encourage people to look to the future and craft a personal vision that may indeed and should probably include the career and maybe even that job. It's surprising that when we look beyond the day-to-day turmoil and difficulties that we may be having in the workplace and focus on the future, focus on a vision of a personal future that's meaningful to us, it's amazing how much resilience we can draw on to get through those challenges.
And through these decisions that people might be making as well, having that resilience, which it sounds like leads to positivity, which leads to that positive change. So that is my collection of clips, Rachel. Lots to think about from the employee's point of view. I should say, with my Mind Tools hat on, we've got loads of resources in our toolkit to help you get better at all the things the experts have talked about, like self-confidence, negotiation, job crafting, and if you join the Mind Tools Club, all the full-length expert interviews. Have a look at mindtools.com. Right, Rachel, your turn now. We also support managers and employers with every aspect of their roles. So what do the experts have to say to them when people come to them asking for more?
Yes, it's interesting, Jonathan, hearing those clips and the whole range, the spectrum of situations that people might find themselves in when they want more money, more compensation. They might just want more money for what they're doing already. They might just want a pay rise. They might want to do a job that gets them more money with more responsibility. That might be within their company. It might be outside their company. So from the employee's point of view, it's a very wide spectrum. From the employer's point of view, it's a little bit narrower, I would say. But as I was delving through the archives, a couple of things did begin to emerge. One is how an employer actually deals with a request for more pay. Anna Wildman is an expert in performance conversations. In her book, which is called Now You're Talking, she really gets into the nitty-gritty of what you should cover in all sorts of conversations. And here's her advice for how to think about pay conversations.
The biggest tip is to hold conversations not just at year end, which is, or at cycle end, but throughout the year. Begin at the beginning of the year by making the process as transparent as you're allowed by your organization. And of course that varies, but explain why your organization pays the way it does. Explain the approach it takes in terms of whether they give particular bonuses, how those bonuses can be influenced, any particular pressures that the organization is under at the moment. And then people are clear about what's happening and it manages their expectations. Now, you might think, well, let's not start on a downer too much in a tough economic environment. But if that's the case for your organization, people will trust you more if you're realistic with them throughout.
So it's really about bringing people along with you, I thought, Jonathan. And that advice was quite similar to what Beverly Kay told me. She's an expert on so-called stay interviews. Have you heard of those?
Stay interviews? No, I'm trying to guess, is that where it's designed to persuade somebody to stay in their job and give them more, maybe?
Yes, that's exactly it. Why spend money recruiting new people when you can just retain the good people that you already have? And when I talked to Beverly Kay, we talked about those tricky conversations when a colleague asks for more money. Here's her advice, and a quick warning that this is phone quality, but I think it's worth it for what she says.
Number one, acknowledge, like I understand that that's what you want, and I can understand how that would be important to you, and, share with them what you just heard them say. And then I really think it's telling the truth. It's saying, I hear that you want that salary raise, and right now I cannot deliver on it. But I'm so motivated to keep you on my team that I want to know what else really matters to you, because I want to find something that I have a degree of control over and see if I can make sure that I deliver that. And you know what's interesting? I think if a manager asks the what else question like 3 times, they will get a plethora of ideas from the individual they're interviewing that they never were aware of. And some of what individuals want sometimes can be easy to make happen. But the problem is we never ask.
Simple, isn't it, Jonathan? You just ask and listen. That's what she says.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some of that did come through on my side in the clips about employees being brave enough to ask and to get those pay conversations started. And I think that does take trust on both sides, because those conversations can be daunting for everyone.
Yes. And what other ways are there to build trust? Well, there are quite a few ways, but being honest is one of the most important ways to build trust, I would have thought. Another really interesting idea that came out of Beverly Kay's interview from her book about stay interviews was what she called blinking words. Any idea what those are?
Blinking words. I tend to blink a bit when I'm nervous. Is it when you betray your nerves about something?
No, it's a nice abstract idea, but it's very visual. So the idea is that you ask a person a question, for example, what else matters to them?
Yes.
And out comes this word cloud. And in the word cloud, these blinking words kind of emerge in front of the person while they're talking. And
the important words.
Yes, and you need to listen out for them if you're the manager or the team leader. And you need to find those blinking words, and then you need to probe them, because they are the ones that will get you to what matters to that person. And then once you really understand what matters to that person, you may be able to think of ways to use that to make their workday or their job better in general. And it's not more money, but it might be more of what's important to that person. Anna Wildman, who we heard earlier, she also thinks that there are other ways to compensate people. And she says that should be part of any conversation about a pay rise, which definitely chimes with, I think it was Melanie Katzman, the clip you played us. She had a great personal anecdote too.
Include in your conversation non-tangible rewards. By that I mean things that are not to do with financial gain, but they are to do with intrinsic motivators, things like rewards to do with having more autonomy, development opportunities. I had a superb boss when I was working for Cathay Pacific Airways. He would give us so many development opportunities. Of course, we were lucky because we could travel places on the company bus, but he would allow us to go and do that, and that was worth such a lot to me in that role that it was a huge part of my overall compensation.
I don't know if you noticed, but Anna slipped in a buzzword there, intrinsic motivator. The psychologist Adrian Furnham had some interesting things to say about this. He related intrinsic and extrinsic motivators directly to pay, interestingly. He mentions Hertzberg in this clip, by the way. Frederick Hertzberg was a psychologist who developed a theory of job satisfaction. There's an article about this on the Mindtool site in case you're interested. So here's Adrian Furnham about motivation and money.
If a supervisor comes to you and said, if you pay people peanuts, you get monkeys, you must sack him immediately because he has no idea about motivating staff. Money is not a motivator. Hertzberg pointed that out very clearly. It prevents
dissatisfaction. People say it's different in the public sector and the private sector, and I said yes, but there's one other sector, and it's called the voluntary sector. Now, in the voluntary sector, you have to manage without carrots and sticks. And you've got to learn something about motivating people where you don't have the ability, well, I suppose you have the ability to sack them, but you certainly don't have the ability to reward them in the usual sense of the word. So how do managers work in the voluntary sector? How do they motivate their people? And I think what you need to do is, of course, it's easier said than done, but to find out the aspects of the job that are intrinsically satisfying. In other words, that are fun to do, and to make it much more of a fun exercise. I was watching. In fact, I think I'm going to write another article on how to motivate sniffer dogs. Now, sniffer dogs are extremely effective, and of course, it's all fun. It's based on fun. They get a fun reward. Now, the extent to which a manager or a leader can understand what part of the jobs are most fun and turn it into and give people an opportunity to have some choice. You can empower them with some choice. And you can understand the difference between an extrinsic motivator, something that is given in compensation for an unpleasant task, as opposed to that which is pleasant. Then you begin to understand the issues around motivation.
How do we feel about being compared to dogs?
I'm not sure. How do you feel? Probably not the best approach for employees, but I guess there are some basic animal instincts there, aren't there, when it comes to these conversations, especially when people get rewards that just make them feel good. So actually, maybe it is like that dog running across the fields, off the leash, having choices, being empowered, when the work you're doing generates good feelings intrinsically. And so it's not about being rewarded because something's unpleasant. The job's good enough to feel good. So I do think we have to look beyond tangible extrinsic rewards. But I would also say employers have to be careful how they sell intrinsic benefits to people. And they can't use them as excuses not to pay people more or promote them. They've got to give them the right tangible rewards too.
I think so. And I don't know if you noticed that Adrian mentioned carrots and sticks there. We featured a few books by Chester Elton and his collaborator, Adrian Gostick. They're big fans of recognition and particularly gratitude as a way of enhancing the work experience. So it's not money, but it might make a difference to how you feel about your job. I love this bit from our expert interview with Chester. He was telling me all the excuses that managers give him for why they don't say thank you often enough.
They say, well, if I do it too often, it'll become trite. You can say thank you too much. And I said, really? This one gentleman I was talking to, I said, are you married? He said, yeah. I said, are you happily married? He said, yeah. I said, for how long? He said, about 20 years. I said, great. How often did you tell your wife that you love her? He goes, oh, every day. Isn't that interesting? It must become trite. He goes, well, no, but that's my wife. I said, yes, but take that to the workplace. I love you in your personal life is thank you in the workplace. Of course, don't get that mixed up. That can cause a lot of problems, with human resources. But the difference in the workplace is this specificity. Is you just can't say, love you, love you, love you, or thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have to say, thank you for staying late and getting the reports in on time. Thank you for taking the extra time with that upset customer and making sure all the details were ironed out. You see what I'm saying? So we talk about frequency, specificity, and then be timely. Do it right away. Don't wait till the end of the quarter, the end of the year. Important things get done now, and it conveys that it's valuable. I did it now. I didn't wait.
He's such an interesting guy, isn't he? I found him very entertaining. It also sounded like you were quite close to you. Was he whispering there? Where were you when you recorded that?
Yes, we were actually in the corner of a large conference hall because Chester was in London to attend an event. He'd kindly given me 30 minutes during a break, so that's why it had that slightly intimate feel to it.
No, it sounded great. Nice to get that proper one-on-one time with the experts when you can. But going back to what you were saying there about gratitude, I'm just thinking in practice, how do you know the boss is sincere and they're not just distracting you from not paying you any more money?
Yes, well, Margaret Greenberg, who is the author of Profit from the Positive, she told me that sincerity is very important, and that's real sincerity, not fake sincerity, just to tie us in knots a bit. But she had a really unusual tip for giving recognition. Listen to this.
One of the guys that we interviewed for Profit from the Positive, he was the co-founder of a company here in the States called EverFi. He had a term that we just loved called praise to the back. We often say, we stab people in the back, when we're being nasty. But he coined a term called praise to the back, meaning you can praise people, directly, of course, and that's important. But we can also praise people to the back, meaning when they're not around, and you happen to be meeting with someone else, and you recognize this other person when they're not in the room, that'll get back to them, just like a negative thing gets back to people, right? So praise to the back can be just as powerful as praising someone face to face.
Just as powerful? I wonder, which would have more meaning for you, do you think, Jonathan? Face-to-face praise or praise to the back?
I think they're both powerful. It feels nice to get that immediate face-to-face feedback from your boss. But I think also it can be really significant if you hear back on the grapevine that they've been saying nice things about you to other people. Bosses, I think, should make sure there's a good chance of it getting back to the person and doesn't just get lost in the ether. So I would say praise to the back is good. Make sure you back it up, if you like, with face-to-face feedback too, to make sure that message really does get across.
And I tell you what, some people would find it a lot easier, wouldn't they? Some managers would find it a lot easier to praise to the back, I think. But a bit of both, like you say. I just wanted to finish with an expert who seems to bring all this together in a really inspiring way.
Excellent.
He's Paul Fasella. He's the author of Everything I Know About Business I Learned at McDonald's. He was an executive at McDonald's and worked there for 34 years. He's, I think it would be fair to say, evangelical about the things that he thinks worked well at the company. He said that there were short-term financial incentives that McDonald's had, like you'd get time and a half if you had record sales in an hour or in a day. But it's the non-financial incentives that were so powerful for him. Listen to this clip about how McDonald's goes to town on awards, or at least did when Paul was there.
Actually, the company tracks 23 different awards that it gives out on an annual basis to vendors, to franchisees, to store managers, to suppliers. 23 different awards, which I think is incredible. And some of these are very prestigious. There's a President's Award, as an example, that's given to the top 1% of all company employees each year. A secretary can get nominated for that award, goes all the way up, and the president of the company finally signs off on that. I actually averaged almost one President's Award winner every year. We had a tremendous team. And then we have the Freddie, which is kind of taken from the Oscars and the Emmys, the Freddie in recognition of Fred Turner, which is given to individuals that possess some of the strong traits of our chairman and co-founder of McDonald's on it. So it's always done with fanfare. It's always done first class. It's taken very seriously. We always try and invite the spouse or the significant other. We try and make it special. And recognition, in a lot of ways, is the glue that keeps people together.
You could probably hear that this idea works hand in glove with opportunity, because as you seize the opportunities at McDonald's, in this case, you rise up through the ranks, and that's how you get more pay.
Yes, I'm sure that is a very powerful way of giving people that visibility and empowering them and doing all those important things and giving them chances to increase their pay, chances to move on. So there's a real practical element to it, as well as all the good feelings about being rewarded and celebrated with your family there.
Yes. And Paul told me, Jonathan, that at least at the time of that interview, that all the CEOs of McDonald's developed within the company. So there was really was a sense of being able to rise from flipping burgers to running the whole company. And that just creates a sense of motivation. And you remember the sniffer dog who we heard about earlier, who enjoys his work? Yep. Well, Paul doesn't talk about dogs, but he does talk about fun. And this is what he said when I asked him about what keeps people at McDonald's.
Well, I think just that idea of opportunity, no question about it. That is very, very powerful to know that you can do that. But I also think we underestimate something that we hear little about in business. McDonald's is a fun place. It's a social organization if you're in the stores. It's very social when you're up in the mid-management ranks. We had a lot of fun accomplishing. And that sense of achievement is very, very powerful. And people are treated fairly. We enjoy each other's company. And few organizations you can talk about we actually enjoy going to work. So I think that's an awful lot that has to do with it as well.
So what I take from that case study of McDonald's is the importance of clear communication and understanding of the situation on all sides. So people know when and why they can ask for a raise and when they would be wasting their time if they did. And importantly, and this is something you mentioned earlier, Jonathan, you get to choose. So you can accept the pay you have and enjoy that level of responsibility. Or you can shoot for more responsibility and more pay according to a very clear path of progression that everyone understands.
Yeah, and you can see why that's worked so well at McDonald's. But it sounds like there could be some good tips there for other companies to try to bring that sort of clarity to people's career progression and give them some smaller wins along the way and a sense of achievement and just some good fun when they come to work.
And in fact, when we look at all the clips that we've heard today, Jonathan, it's quite gratifying that there doesn't seem to be any tension between the two sides in terms of the right way forward. So if you're an employee, you need to know your value, you need to express it in the right way at the right time. And if you're an employer, you need to be open to hearing that and discussing it and finding out what matters to that person. If it really is pay, then perhaps to identify promotion opportunities. Or if there are other ways to compensate that person more richly, to find out what those ways are.
I think you're right. I hope we've done our bit to bring the two sides together to kind of create that extra understanding, because it does seem like there's a very fertile middle ground there if both sides are approaching it in a certain way and there's honesty and there's openness. So let's hope that we've helped make more of that happen out there in the world.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll be back soon with our next episode of the Mind Tools Expert Voices podcast. We'll be talking about psychological safety at work. What is it and how do you get it? But before that, Jonathan, don't you think it would be great to hear what our listeners think about what they've heard today?
It really would. So which bits of advice ring true? And are there any that don't sound right anymore? It really would be good to hear people's own experiences of asking for a pay raise or being asked for one. And what additional advice can we gather to tackle the questions that we've discussed today?
An email is the best way to get in touch. We're at expertvoicespodcast@mindtools.com. And you can leave a voice note there too, which we might even play in a future episode.
If you've enjoyed our chat today, you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our podcasts in the future. Please give us a rating too where you can and spread the word about us. So that's expertvoicespodcast@mindtools.com to get in touch. And why not check out everything else that Mind Tools has to offer to help you grow your career and get properly rewarded for it. Just go to mindtools.com to see all of our free resources, plus information about joining the Mind Tools Club and getting everything we've got, including the full-length expert interviews. And we've put some useful links for you in the description of this podcast.
For now, thanks for listening. And see you next time, Jonathan, for the Mind Tools Expert Voices podcast.
Absolutely. I'm off to back praise you now to somebody, Rachel. You can be sure of that.
Thanks.